Welcome back to Kevin Toll Reads. It is time for Saturday Shorts, and I am proud to say that one of my Saturday Shorts came from this book. Oh, well, it's an e-reader. Yep, I got an e-reader. Stick around. Oh, and one thing, don't forget, this Sunday at 6 p.m. Central, I'll be live. It's your chance to roast me. Hope to see you there. So my first short story for Saturday Shorts comes from this collection, The Modern Classics of Fantasy. I went with a tale, 10 pages in length, written by Wolfe, called A Cabin on the Coast. And the story was published in 1981. This collection was formulated in 1997. And so let's dive right in and talk about the summary of the short story by Wolfe. A Cabin on the Coast, it starts off with Lizzie and Tim Ryan Jr. They appear to be on vacation, but then you kind of realize maybe they're kind of on the lam, so to speak. They don't want to hamper Tim's father, who apparently is a senator and bears the same name and same resemblance. They are staying at his father's cabin near the coast in the Pacific Ocean, and they are talking about future, and everything's very subtly done. You don't really get a lot of backstory, and I think that's purposely done on Wolfe's part. But Tim continues to see this strange kind of ship off in the distance in the horizon of the Pacific Ocean. And when he thinks he sees it, then it's gone. All while this is taking place, he wakes up the following day, and Lizzie is nowhere to be seen, thinking that she took a dip in the ocean as he has been doing every day. The next thing you know, he can't find her, and he starts to investigate where she could have gone. And that's where the story kind of takes some weird twists and turns. And so what makes it a really good short story? Wolfe's dialogues are really, really well done. I liked Wolfe's prose, his sentence structure, but I also like the way that in formulating his sentences, you have to kind of read between the lines. There's a lot being said that is not written in the words themselves, but between the words. And I think there's a lot of interpretation of how this story could affect a reader. And so I thought that was really interesting. Lizzie's disappearance, after Tim goes to the cops and explains what's going on briefly, is very obtuse in a way, because the cops seem very disinterested, even though it's very new and they don't technically call someone missing until 24 hours. There's a very offhandedness, especially when they realize that Tim's father is a senator. The ending is very, very trippy. The climax of this story is very kind of out there. What seems like just a pretty straightforward kind of eerie, weird missing persons kind of dwells into kind of a fantasy type ending, and that's all I'm going to say. There is an excerpt that I wanted to read you. It is in the author's note at the very beginning of the story, written by Wolfe, and it says, "The little people are known to have the power to grant wishes of all sorts, but it is always dangerous for mortals to try to bargain with them. Often they give you what you ask for, but always for a price." And I read that excerpt from the author's note because it plays heavily into this story. In terms of rating and overall, I give this a 3.9. I really enjoyed my kind of first foray into Wolfe's writing. I thought it was very, very well done. There is, it's one of those stories that kind of makes you feel like, there's something that you're as a reader, you have to kind of figure out for yourself. And so I did a little research online and just put the story's name in and asked, about, the conclusions and what people's thoughts were. And there's a lot of people that have varying difference of opinion when it comes to the twist of this story and what it all means. And it's one of those stories that doesn't tell you everything and leaves you kind of having to fill in the blanks to some regard. Not that I think that's a bad thing. it's not done in that way where you're kind of like, well, that was kind of a waste of time or a waste of money. It's done in a way that really kind of makes you think about, what was the purpose of that? What really did happen? And I think that's indicative of a good story. And so I really enjoyed this one. A Cabin on the Coast by Gene Wolfe. I gave it a 3.9 out of 5.
2,000 years later.
And so for my second short story, I went into this collection by Ross MacDonald, The Archer Files. This was a recommendation from Pat at Book Chat with Pat. She's like, hey, I think this is something that's up your alley. I think in I think it was a tag video, she had different booktuber friends where she made book recommendations to them, and she knew that I liked different types of genres, and this is one of them that she recommended, and I immediately just went out and purchased it off Thrift Books. And so I got this kind of omnibus collection of the Lou Archer files from Ross MacDonald, and so I figured it was time to crack it open. And so I read Find the Woman, which happens to be the first introduction to Lou Archer. This collection, I believe, was published in 2007, but the actual story itself, upon looking it up online, the Find the Woman was the first Lou Archer story published in 1946. It's 27 pages in length, crime fiction pulp kind of noir story, and so definitely something I knew that was probably going to be right up my alley, and I wasn't disappointed. So let's talk about the summary of this. So in this tale, we get to meet Lou Archer. It being the first story, Lou is freshly out of the army. He's sitting in his office in Southern California, and he makes mention that, he can kind of still see the wet paint. So he's definitely new to the private investigator game, and he is approached by a lady named Miss Doreen, and she is in and out of acting in Southern California, kind of the Hollywood lifestyle. And so she hires Mr. Archer in kind of a cagey way. She doesn't really want to tell all the details, and Archer can kind of understand that, but she hires him to find her daughter, and her daughter's name is Una Sand, and she is also pretty famous in the area in Southern California. And so Archer takes up the investigation, and what he thinks is just a disappearance where Una may or may not be killed or dead or murdered. It turns out to be more than he bargained for, as he meets some other characters in and out of the movie industry, bodyguards, some just things that don't add up. And before you know it, he is finding himself trying to navigate through all of these plot lines. There's also a young husband that was just off of the base in Pearl Harbor, and he comes back, and how does he fit into all this? Himself and Una were newlyweds, and so it's a very kind of quagmire of a mystery, and I really enjoyed it. So let's talk about what makes it a good short story. Obviously, being my first introduction, this is an origin story for me for Archer, and I really enjoyed that. The writing is just right up my alley. It heavily reminds me of McBain, John MacDonald, Lawrence Block. I mean, it's just right up my alley. I find the time period that this is in, the setting, you have, what could be, the 50s, 40, 50, 60s. You have Southern California. You have the Hollywood kind of in the background, movie discussions, agents. It's very, very cool kind of time period, and definitely a throwback. I thought the premise was really good of the story as well. What seems to be kind of just a missing persons, but ulterior motives. What is Mrs. Doreen after? What is her true motivation? I thought that was really well done. It's definitely hinted at, and it becomes more prevalent as the story and characters kind of flush themselves out, especially in front of Archer. Archer seems to be one of those characters that is a little ahead of everyone, but doesn't show it. It has a very, very good poker face. And so I really enjoyed that. In terms of excerpts, there was one that really caught my eye, so to speak, and it was in the very beginning. I think it was in like the second paragraph. It said, "Her eyes were green and inconstant like the sea. They said, 'What the hell?'" And I thought that was a really, really good line. In terms of rating and overall, I give this a 4.1. I think it's an excellent short story. I'm glad Miss Pat recommended this. This is definitely something that I enjoyed. I definitely can see myself enjoying more. I can even see myself reading some of these and reviewing them on the channel, similar to what I did with Conan and Sherlock. Do it more episodically. But who knows? I really enjoyed the writing style. I thought it was a great read, very quick. And that's my take on Find the Woman from Ross MacDonald, 4.1 out of 5. And so, yes, this is the third story. I went with a tale from Pal Anderson. I've been calling him Pool Anderson, but I believe it's pronounced Pal Anderson. And I went with the short story Sentiment Incorporated, and I got it on I noticed I had these great like omnibus mega packs on Kindle. And so I was like, yeah, I'm definitely down for that. I picked up some Raymond Chandler, some Pal Anderson. I picked up a couple Robert E. Howards. Some really, really cool stuff. I know there's some really good Lovecraft out there as well. And so, yeah, I've been trying to get myself ingratiated with this, but I read this 53-page kind of short story / novella on my new Kindle Paperwhite that I got for our 25th anniversary from my lovely wife. She completely surprised me, and I am really over the moon about it. The first thing I actually downloaded, though, was The Count of Monte Cristo, the Robin Buss Penguin edition, and put it on here because having that huge book in bed is cumbersome. So this is definitely a huge step up and a win in that regard alone. But yeah, I am over the moon about this thing, and you'll definitely probably see me talk more about this. But yeah, really cool kind of. Yeah, I like the cover art, even though it's in this black and white kind of for Kindle. But anyways, so Sentiment Incorporated, published in 1953 by Pal Anderson. And let's dive right in and talk about the summary of this thing. So the summary revolves around the main protagonist, Colin Fraser. He is in love with a girl named Judy Harkness. And Colin is kind of a mathematician, engineer, and he lives up in, I believe, New Hampshire area, Vermont, and he comes into the New York City and rents a place in Brooklyn. He has some money saved up because that is where Judy is she's trying to make it as, I believe, an actress. And so he wants to be near her, so he rents kind of a place for a while and keeps calling on her to try to get dates. And when he calls her one day, Judy has explained to him that she has fallen for an older man, a gentleman named Matthew Snyder. Colin is dumbstruck, but doesn't know what to do. He meets up with Judy to try to figure out what's going on. Judy informs Colin that she sees something in Matthew now, and it was after she had a couple appointments with a psychiatrist that paid her money to do some looks at her brain, and that triggers, like, what is that about? And so Colin starts to use his assets and his friends to try to dig in and find out what is going on and what is this place called Sentiment Incorporated. And so that is the premise of this. So what makes it a really good short story? It's an interesting premise. I really enjoyed it. It starts out kind of like a love story, and then it becomes like a whodunit and why, and dwells into the science fiction. Pal's writing is great. I continue to say that. I need to read one of his novels, definitely to give my final stamp of approval. But everything I've read from him, from short stories to novellas, I've really, really enjoyed. It's matter of fact, it's straight, it moves things along really, really well. There's not wasted words, there's no fluff. I don't ever feel like he's trying to be cagey, and I just think it's just really, really good. There's some interesting side characters in this story that I think that are really integral and do a really good job of rounding out kind of this little world, this little story. And Jim Swartzky, Colin's friend, who has ties and works for the government in DC, but lives in the New York area. That was an interesting side character. Also, Juan Martinez, who is a PI who was in the Army along with Colin, and he looks him up and has Juan do some investigative work. I really liked Dr. Kennedy, the person who is doing the experiments, part of Sentient Incorporated, and there's interesting little nods and ties to the Soviet Union. There's, the changing of neural pathways, and there's ramifications, and there's all this, talk about the science fiction around it. But it does understate the larger question, which I think Anderson was going for, hinting at is, like in most science fiction stories, is why? Why would we do that? Why should we do that? Is it the right thing to do? And I think it's present in this short story as well. In terms of excerpts, I have two. The first is, the name is Swartzky, not Holmes. And that is indicative of when Colin asks Swartzy to do a little digging for him. And then another one was, ever hear the fable about the lion? He licked the hell out of the bear and the tiger and the rhinoceros, but a little gnat finally drove him nuts. And that was an interesting kind of back and forth between Fraser and Dr. Kennedy. In terms of rating and overall, I give this a 4.3 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. I continue, like I said, to be amazed by Anderson's writing. I did also want to throw out there that this story is available for free on Project Gutenberg. You can go out there and find it. I thought that was very interesting as well. I think there's about 20 or 25 different short stories from Anderson out there on Project Gutenberg. Definitely a free resource if you are interested. Online, you can get different books, short stories, and there's a lot out there that you can get for free in the public domain. So again, that is my take for Saturday Shorts this week. I had 3 really good ones. I continue to pick out some really decent ones. I'm interested always in this series. Saturday Shorts is just, it's become a pillar of my channel, and I continue to enjoy it every week, and I hope you do as well. I will talk to you all in the next one. Have a good weekend.